Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea reports a dramatic rise in COVID-19 cases, more than 500 in a single day for the first time since March. Cases are sporadic, but much of the increase is from a military base. The Bank of Korea raises its forecast for the country's economic growth both this year and next year. For 2020, it's calling for growth of minus 1.1%. And the foreign ministers of South Korea and China meet for talks in Seoul. The Chinese official says a visit to South Korea by President Xi Jinping will be possible when the pandemic gets under control. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korea reported more than 500 cases of the coronavirus today for the first time since the first peak of the pandemic 8 months ago. There are clusters across the country, including a large one at a military base. Baeunji reports.
South Korea saw 583 new COVID-19 infections on Thursday. Of them, 533 were locally transmitted. This is the first time the country has seen over 500 cases since the first wave of the outbreak in March. The high numbers are largely due to a mass infection that was reported on Wednesday at a military unit in Yeoncheon County in Gyeonggi-do Province. At least 70 soldiers have tested positive, and with around 1,000 military personnel undergoing testing, more cases are expected. To contain the spread, level 2.5 social distancing measures have been placed on the military until December 7th. During this period, military personnel cannot go on leave, and all personal and religious gatherings are prohibited. Cluster infections were seen in other parts of the country as well, with 52 people infected at an aerobic center in western Seoul. The city of Jinju in Gyeongsangnam-do Province also had 23 cases, mostly city officials who went on a business trip to Jeju Island and their family members. Health Minister Bang Neung-woo said on Thursday that the virus has been spreading rapidly among people in their 20s and 30s, with that age group making up 28% of those who tested positive in the country. As most of the domestic cases came from the capital area, the government has imposed level 2 social distancing measures on the greater Seoul area since Tuesday. The heightened measures are likely to remain in place for 2 weeks. Baeunji, Arirang News.
A week from now, some 500,000 high school seniors and other people applying for university will take the nationwide college entrance exam. The stakes are high, so for the sake of the test takers, the Minister of Education is asking the whole country to pull together and follow the virus prevention guidelines. Kim Yeon-sung reports.
South Korea's College Scholastic Ability Test takes place 1 week from now, on December 3rd. It's the first time the test has ever been postponed to as late as December. The pandemic gave health authorities and the Ministry of Education no choice but to push it back for the safety of the roughly 500,000 students sitting in it. Even with the unprecedented delay, Education Minister Yoo Eun-hae is concerned the testing centers could be possible for superspreader locations. On Thursday, she urged everyone in society to get on board with the prevention measures.
The government alone can't prevent an outbreak during the biggest test of the year for 490,000 people. It can only succeed with the help of everybody.
The minister asked households that have a student taking the test to socially distance until the day of the test, as there is a high chance of the virus spreading among family members. But she stressed that everyone is responsible for social distancing.
I ask everyone to put themselves in the shoes of the students' parents and refrain from social activities for a week.
Given the situation, the government has increased the number of testing centers 50% more than last year, so students can safely distance. Students who have to self-isolate will take the test in separate rooms. The minister also said the government will make sure students won't be deprived of their chance to take the test, even if they have contracted the virus or have to go into quarantine. Kim Yeon-sung, Arirang News.
In other news, China's Foreign Minister Wang is in Seoul and is understood to be meeting right now with President Moon Jae-in. Earlier in the day, he met with South Korea's Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa. Wang expressed gratitude to South Korea for helping China fight COVID-19, and he said he thinks Xi Jinping will be able to come to Seoul once the pandemic subsides. Yoon Jung-min reports.
During the first face-to-face meeting in around a year, South Korean Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa and her Chinese counterpart Wang Yi stressed the importance of cooperating on several fronts, including tackling COVID-19.
Based on our common will to continue the development of our bilateral relationship, today I expect to exchange views with Minister Wang to reinforce our strategic partnership as we mark 30 years of diplomatic relations in 2022.
The Chinese foreign minister thanked Seoul for helping Beijing fight the pandemic while touching upon bilateral cooperation on regional and global issues.
Our visit to South Korea amid the pandemic shows the importance of Sino-Korean ties. I hope to talk about exchanges between the two countries on various issues and have a strategic communication on regional and international issues with Minister Kang today.
The two ministers also discussed the Korean peace process and ways to work together on the economy, culture, environment, and historical excavations. The Chinese diplomat also invited Kang to China. When asked about a possible visit to South Korea by Chinese President Xi Jinping, Wang told reporters that he believed it would be possible when the COVID-19 situation is under control. He added he appreciated the warm invitation by South Korean President Moon Jae-in. On the issue of the U.S.-China rivalry, the Chinese diplomat answered diplomacy is not a simple issue and once again emphasized Seoul-Beijing cooperation. He added that the two neighbors need to further work on their bilateral free trade agreement. In the afternoon, Wang Yi visited the Blue House to meet South Korean President Moon Jae-in. Likely on the agenda is the possible visit to South Korea by Chinese President Xi Jinping and a potential trilateral summit between South Korea, China, and Japan. Wang is leaving Seoul on Friday, and while here, he's also expected to meet some ruling party lawmakers and other key figures. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The Bank of Korea has raised its growth forecast for the local economy for both this year and next year. It's now calling for growth in 2020 of minus 1.1%, which is an improvement of 0.2% from its previous forecast. The BOK has also decided to keep its benchmark interest rate at a record low of 0.5%. Kim Jae-hee has the details.
The Bank of Korea has raised its forecast for economic growth for both this year and next year. This year, the BOK expects GDP to shrink 1.1%, which is an improvement of 0.2 percentage points from its previous forecast. For next year, the forecast is now 3%, also up 0.2 percentage point from the forecast made in August. The BOK governor explained that the domestic economy is expected to see a modest recovery as exports improve and investment grows.
This year's growth outlook was revised up, thanks to better-than-expected exports and facilities investment. Next year, the local economy is expected to grow 3% on improvements in exports and continued investment as the global economy gradually recovers. This forecast was made under the assumption that the spread of COVID-19 stabilizes by the middle or latter part of next year.
But the central bank chief noted that the economy is not yet fully on course for a recovery and is still at risk of COVID-19 spreading further. He also warned that the current third wave of the virus could have a greater impact on the economy than the second wave in August and September, and left open the possibility that the economic outlook could change depending on how the virus situation unfolds, a view shared by other economists.
This year's economic growth could fall short of expectations depending on how long the third wave of COVID-19 lasts. There's uncertainty surrounding the resurgence, the development and distribution of vaccines, and the virus situation overseas.
Amid the uncertainty, the central bank on Thursday kept its benchmark interest rate unchanged at a record low of 0.5%. The rate has been cut twice this year, by a 0.5 percentage point in March and by a 0.25 percentage point in May. The BOK is sticking with an accommodative policy to offset the economic hit from the virus, but it's not cutting further to avoid fueling the rise in household debt and property prices. Kim Jae-hee, Arirang News.
The pandemic has caused a significant decline in salaried jobs for Koreans aged 30 and younger. According to Statistics Korea, in the second quarter, salaried jobs for people younger than 30 declined from a year earlier by 4.4%. That's a loss of 164,000 jobs. Statistics Korea officials said the biggest declines for this age group were in the hospitality industry, which has a high proportion of younger workers, and in manufacturing. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Kim Se-wan, professor of economics at Ewha Women's University. Professor Kim, good afternoon and thank you for coming on.
Good afternoon, Devin.
Well, the Bank of Korea has decided to keep its key interest rate where it is at a record low of 0.5%. What do you make of this decision, Professor?
Today, Bank of Korea decided to hold its policy rate unchanged at a record low of 0.5%. And this decision is much expected in the market previously. Actually, Bank of Korea slashed the key interest rate to all-time low of 0.5% in May to bolster COVID pandemic hit Korean economy. And after that, Bank of Korea is holding the key interest rate over 6 months. Bank of Korea's low interest rate regime will be continued until it sees a significant sign of weakening COVID pandemic.
Well, the Bank of Korea today also raised its growth forecast for the Korean economy this year from minus 1.3% to minus 1.1%. And next year it's calling for growth of 3%. So with the third wave of COVID-19 right now in Korea, what's behind this improved outlook?
Since Bank of Korea decision on key interest rate holding is something expected, more attention has been paid on Bank of Korea's economic forecast updates today. Bank of Korea sees Korean economy is slightly recovering as a whole amid growing concerns over a winter wave of coronavirus infection. Bank of Korea revised up this year's economic growth outlook to 1.1% contraction compared to a previous forecast of 1.3% contraction. This improved growth forecast is made by significant signs of recovering in export and domestic investment, particularly in automobiles and memory chip industries. But Bank of Korea, as there are still lots of uncertainties ahead, Bank of Korea also expected Korean economy to grow 3% next year, which is faster than a previous forecast of 2.8% expansion for 2021.
Well, looking at the stock markets, Wall Street took a breather overnight the day after the Dow broke through 30,000 for the first time. The Nasdaq, with its tech stocks, though, was the exception. It rose to a new all-time high. What's the story in the global markets?
On Tuesday's market in this week, Dow Jones Industrial has exceeded 30,000 level for the first time in history. But as COVID-19 rapidly resurges, U.S. market is depressed yesterday down below 30,000 level. And increasing unemployment over 2 straight weeks also gave a burden to stock market yesterday. However, Nasdaq has maintained its positive momentum with 0.5% return, which is daily return, yesterday.
In the Korean markets, they started the session today a little weak, but closed significantly higher. On the Kospi, institutions were selling, but retail and foreign investors were buying. Tell us about the trade today in Seoul.
Domestic market has had positive returns in both of Kospi and Kosdaq. Kospi gained 0.9% today, and Kosdaq also gained 1.1% in a day. There were strong buys from both of individual investors and foreign investors in Kospi. And in Kosdaq, foreign investors and domestic institutional investors had a strong buy today.
Well, now we're in the third wave of the pandemic here in Korea, and so there's talk of a possible third round of relief payments for people, possibly to every household in Korea. It's an idea that's highly controversial. What do you make of the situation, Professor? Is there a way to help people that would be more effective?
Whether to provide third emergency relief funds totally depends on how much resurgence of pandemic is hurting Korean economy. There are actually lots of discussions on the effects of previous two times of disaster emergency relief funds. The impacts of relief funds were actually not as strong as expected. And a problem with it is we can't continue this program over and over again because the fiscal resource is limited. But if the impact of third wave of pandemic is stronger than expected, government should be implementing cashing out program as soon as possible.
Well, let's hope the situation gets under control sooner rather than later. Thank you so much, Professor, for coming on today. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Now, the South Korean government has been giving rebates to people who dine out to boost the economy, but now it's switching those to food delivery. Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi announced the change Thursday, saying it's in line with the newly heightened social distancing measures. The rebates will be switched back to dining out when the measures are eased. The discounts are not only for when you order direct from the restaurant, they're also good for food delivery apps. Also, he said, in an annual government-run retail promotional event called Christmas Market will be held this year online. And that does it for this newscast. Thank you for watching.